Hi, Joe. Welcome to the Yeti Cave. How's everything going back in New York?
Everything is not bad, I guess. Back in New York, it's been cooling off some, thankfully.
Okay.
Yankees are in first place. City's doing pretty great by my metrics.
Yeah, it was the most pleasant I'd ever seen it the last time I was there, which was 2022 after the pandemic. And I noticed, I was like, whoa, there's all this like pedestrian space that didn't used to exist.
Yeah,
And you've lived there for a long time, right?
I'm a native. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess like seeing it evolve over the last, what, lifespan of, what do you most like about how it has evolved, and is there anything you really really miss from growing up?
Uh, it feels like the city's never been safer, even though there gets to be a lot of noise. Even though you hear some grumblings from some people that want to make political points at the city's
Right.
expense,
Yeah.
I think by and large, it's never been safer or cleaner. That's my
That's two
impression.
thumbs up. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Which makes it like, some people romanticize the gritty era of New York, and I get that. Like I like Lou Reed songs too, and I like, I grew up
Yeah.
here in the '70s and the '80s, so I like the aesthetic of it all. But there was a lot of human misery attached to that back when, so it's kind of like I'm not really nostalgic for past. I wish my friends could still afford to live here. It seems like so many people have gotten forced out of New
I
York
sad.
City.
Yeah.
I used to have plenty of friends on the Upper West Side of Manhattan alone, which is where I am.
Mhm.
And now it's like, my friends in this city live way out in Brooklyn or
Yeah, housing shift, and yeah, chasing affordable property, I feel like is a global, there are more and more people every year,
yeah, no,
but
I've been in a rent stabilized apartment forever, and around me is all like gorgeous penthouses, and
mhm.
it's
Oh
fascinating.
man. Yeah, Europe, it was the Ghostbusters territory, was it? And is that where that building was situated? We've gotten way off topic. I can
Yeah,
direct.
yeah, yeah. No, it's not up here quite. It's I think it's more like Midtown on the west side.
Ah, gotcha. But yeah, so we are here to chat about your three-volume Image Comics release, Great Pacific, which is receiving an omnibus printing through Zoop entitled The Completely Trashed Edition.
Yes,
It's been
sir.
nearly a decade since the conclusion of the story, so what precipitated this collaboration with Zoop for the new consolidated re-release?
Well, I think Zoop's existence was definitely part of it. I saw that as a vehicle to get this series back into print, and collect it the way I think it should be. And I think, I mean, it's kind of a prescient series in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is still there.
Yep.
Um, uh, and we've seen the rise of the altruistic billionaire since then, sort of. So I think our protagonist is a little prescient too.
Yeah.
Um, and it seems like a day doesn't go by where I don't read a new article about where microplastics are being found.
Well, yeah, they're everywhere. They're in everything at this point,
Everything.
all
They're,
through
they're
our
in the
endocrine
human
system.
brain. They're in newborn babies. I mean,
Yep.
so if anything, I don't know what my outlook is necessarily, but I know that it's not getting cleaned up.
No, no, it is pervasive, and it's going to. This is what one of those markers of the Anthropocene is. This layer we're going to have for this period from
Right,
20 something on of these
right,
different polymers that entered the market, and we'll have this layer of what was going
right.
on
It'll
then.
be it'll
In
be in the
in
fossil record.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it'll be a blip in the fossil record when we were doing this, and hopefully we can get out of it as quickly as possible. But yeah, so this leads into my next question. Given my conservation work in the Pacific, when Zoop offered the interview, I was very excited. I jumped at it. It's a topic that I've been like intimately involved in at a policy level for years. And
yeah,
so the University of the South Pacific had Great Pacific on its library shelves. So I got like a lot of the stuff that I get for this, through Comic Book Yeti is like brand new stuff or indie stuff
right.
that I've never seen before, but I'd actually read your books. So I was obviously the inspiration for the setting came from your exposure to news around the very real garbage patch, still there, as you mentioned. it helps provide this scale comparison for New Texas as well. Like, oh, twice the size of Texas. And
Oh yeah,
what
yeah.
preparatory reading went into this process? And the other thing I was going to ask is, you dealt with it on this macro scale, like, because you can't actually stand on the garbage
No,
patch.
no, no. Of course not.
So, yeah, what went into, like, you read about, how did it go from that initial news item to a full volume graphic
Well,
novel?
I always looked at Great Pacific as being a cautionary tale that may take place like a few minutes in the future or so.
Mhm.
And I always thought, well, we're taking some creative license. And I remember at the time when I published this, there were some people in in the oceanic sciences who weren't that pleased that we were depicting it this way, because they thought that the reality, when people learn that it's not an actual contiguous continent, that they might lose interest, or they might. And I understand that concern. I always
Yeah, yeah,
looked
yeah.
at it as a storyteller, telling speculative fiction. I always thought this is what happens if you do nothing.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
If you don't, if
absolutely.
you don't do anything, we're going to end up with parts of the earth that are almost entirely defined by their plastic content.
Yeah,
And
and that's how the economies are built in places in, like, Bangladesh and Pakistan and different, there are trash heaps all over
sure,
Southeast Asia where all of this plastic goes. Like, I was just reading about someone who put an Apple tracking device in
yeah, I've read those articles too.
their trash, and it was just like getting piled up, and they're just warehousing this stuff. No one is
No, I know it's
properly
so.
entering it back into the circular economy. They're not remanufacturing. These polymers are going to be around, so we need to put them in the longest use case, like, form possible, basically.
Everything
And
I have ever read is, talks about how plastic recycling is done terribly and it doesn't work. And I'm sure it can work. It just takes the will and the resources, but um, it's discouraging.
oh yeah, no, it's stuff I'm talking about with. There are people at the university here. I met with one of the engineering faculty. I was like, "Who's working on these polymer reformations?" Because it's basically, we have, high density polyethylene, low density polyethylene, polypropylene. Not very much is getting done with any of those. We shouldn't be using PVC or polystyrene at all,
Yeah,
really, if we could avoid it, and finding bio-based alternatives. I can go on and on about this for
sure.
ages, but I want to talk more about some of your other work, like the
Okay.
film you wrote, Darkness Falls, which I also watched shortly after it came out in 2003. You were working on short films and comics even earlier with your run at Marvel, including Bishop the Last Man, and then you did various Spider-Man and X-Men related titles. So
Right.
you've since gone on to work with DC and all the other major indie comic publishers out there. Can you share a bit about how you got started writing professionally in comics and how you
Well,
were able to
I went to
bridge that
film
into feature
school.
films?
I went to film school
Right.
here in New York. And I always wanted to make comics and make movies. Those were pretty much the two things I wanted to
Good
do.
work. You
Well,
pulled it off.
it's fun. I was able to sort of leverage one against the other before
Mhm.
it was kind of cool. Like,
Right. Yeah.
there weren't really many movie-based people working in comics back when I started out, so I kind of got to present myself as a prince from a foreign land almost. Like
Yes.
my student film was playing festivals. It was a conversation starter when I would start
Yeah.
trying to hang out at different comic book offices trying to get a job, much less a
Right.
career. And I had a screening of my film at the Tribeca Film Center here in town, and Adam Polina, who's a dear childhood friend of mine, former X-Force artist and Marvel mainstay, he
Yep.
bought
Yep.
a bunch of Marvel editors down to the screening to see my film, and we all hit it off, and we started talking, and they said, you should come try, writing for us some, and I did, and it just sort of rolled. But then I'm working at Marvel and I'm doing the books you mentioned, and I'm like, but I really want to make a movie. So I had this idea, this really dark, twisted horror idea about the Tooth Fairy and about what
Cool.
happens if you don't follow the rules and go to sleep when you're supposed to, so that she can take your tooth from under the pillow. Like, there are some dire consequences if you don't follow the rules.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was my short film, and that got into some producers' hands, and they're like, we think you should write the feature for us. And that's sort of how that all started. And then once I was sort of running on the Hollywood treadmill, which is kind of like, I made
Right.
another film.
In development. Yeah.
Yeah, I made another film. I did some work, lots of pitches, lots of uncredited work, like script doctoring, things like
Mhm.
that. I wanted, meanwhile, comics had changed. Image Comics wasn't
Right.
necessarily just about Spawn and Cyberforce anymore. Now it was The Walking Dead, and you had Vertigo had Y the Last Man, and
Yeah.
there was this had become the comics had become really diverse in terms of content,
Mhm.
and I kept thinking, I miss the immediacy of working in comics, and so I was able to sort of step one leg back into that world and start publishing stuff through Image and some other publishers. And today, that's what I still feel like I'm doing. I'm trying to leverage one against the other.
Yeah, they're definitely, I guess, what a lot fewer gatekeepers on the narrative involved in the comics process when you're doing it independently, as opposed to going through the studio system and production company process. A lot
Yeah,
more hands on deck.
DIY still works. I mean,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
still
that was what
works.
the conversation I had with Steve Niles. We were talking about some of his new Storm King releases, and we were discussing, that same, like, he came out of the Discord punk scene, and he's
Yeah.
just like, yeah, just done it the whole way through DIY. If you care about it, do it yourself. So yeah, to return to Great Pacific, which is a creator owned book, you created this really complex protagonist in Chaz Worthington, who's this
Mhm.
heir to a multinational extractive company known for making the world an awful place. And Worthington seems to like carve out his own legacy on the high seas, in unclose waters, and stake a claim in this to a garbage patch in an alternate reality where it's, you know, deep enough, dense enough for you to set up camp upon.
Right.
So, you can totally homestead it in this version of the world. When I
Right.
first read the comic, it immediately evoked the aspiring seasteaders movement, whose efforts
Yeah.
gained greater publicity around that same time, largely driven by this like billionaire. I know like Peter Thiel was involved in it early, like this libertarian oriented entrepreneur
Well, that's what they
movement.
always are, right? No one moves out.
Yeah, yeah.
No one founds these micronations to really make the world a better place.
Yeah, well, that's how. No, it hasn't been happening that way. It's not the way it's come together. So I guess like, how did how close of attention were you paying to that throughout, and like how did that reflect itself in the creation of Worthington as a character?
I have to be honest with you. I know the term seasteader,
Mhm.
but that whole you referenced something in the news that I honestly think I missed at the time.
Oh, okay.
To be honest with
Well,
you, I for me stories like the Nation of Minerva or things
oh
that
yeah,
stick
yeah,
out
yeah,
for
yeah.
me. Like again, your typical libertarian asshole thinks they know how to build a paradise, and they learned a lesson when the king of Tonga sent troops to take them out.
Minerva is a hotly contested place. I mean, it's like the Pakistan India border. Like there's a
Yeah,
certain
yeah.
amount of naval posturing that's constantly going on there.
Well, like the
It's
South China Sea, I think too. It's
yeah, yeah,
anything they
yeah,
can
yeah,
do to increase their territory.
yeah, and it's I now I don't want to spoil anything. That's a good segue into the next because we're talking about sovereignty and not to spoil anything. You've got a diverse cast, lots of different motives and interests in this
Mhm.
story. Given my work in the region, the allusion to the nuclear legacy of the United States and the Marshall Islands definitely comes into play
Yeah.
when your world's version of the U.S. government takes issue with Worthington's assertion of sovereignty on this new perch in the high seas. And then there's a bit of turnabout that plays on the history of the Marshall Islands with Little Chief's tribe of native islands, which there
Right.
aren't any islands
They
out
don't
there.
exist in that part of the
Yeah,
Pacific. I know.
yeah.
My
So
answer to all of that is artistic license, but please
yeah.
continue.
Well, and that's I was going to say with the seasteading thing, it seems like it's very much an instance of life imitating art as well, because you were doing this as there were guys like, yeah, let's do that. Let's
Yeah.
get out there and do it.
Yeah. Well,
And
like I said, I'd read about other micronations too, like Sealand and
yeah,
I guess out in the Orkneys or something. That's where it is off the coast of Scotland, right?
yeah.
Um,
There's the like there was the elevated tower. Yeah, like just I've always been fascinated with that stuff. Well, and that's part of why I loved your book. It was an exploration of all of these ideas that otherwise, I mean, it's just not an area that's been covered adequately at all. I
mm,
think. And yeah, so I mean, thematically, it's concerned with geopolitics, environmentalism, technological aspirations, which are increasingly prevalent in the glowing climate fiction space. So it's something I'm examining closely in my dissertation right now. So I'm looking
Okay.
at this like near future climate response scenario across the region because I've basically been doing all this policy work, and it like I write a document that says, okay, you need to decarbonize at this rate over this period of time by doing these things, or we won't hit our targets and we'll blow our carbon budget. And it goes on a shelf and nobody does anything.
Yeah.
So, like, this is, when researching and writing, where do you draw the lines? You said artistic license, but like, as I feel like I'm being asked very specifically, like, okay, how do you bound this to reality? Because this speculation has to be according to all of these very specific rules. And
Right.
so, what rules do you set for yourself when you're writing uh, anything? I guess.
I don't know. I don't know how to really quantify that. Obviously, we wanted to have one toe in reality, if not a
Yeah.
whole foot. I mean, so I knew it was a topical subject, and I knew that it was going to be hyper realized. I think you just try to get it right. I think there's a way to do speculative fiction where you make these departures, but hopefully it illuminates something in the reality as well.
Right.
And
It's
if
an
you,
analogous exercise.
yeah, and if this, and I guess, make it relatable enough that people want to learn the truth, because I think the truth
Mhm.
purely, I think it really is stranger than fiction. Um, so
It's
I don't
more
know.
ominous and insidious for sure.
What's that?
Like yours, I mean, like I think the way your story deals with the topic is it's in a very like macroscopic, you can see it on a page sort of way. Like, because you can't telling the story about the depth and insidious nature of how the plastics ended up in the environment to begin with would be a much longer graphic novel, and it would
Yes,
probably look less interesting. So I
probably.
guess that's part of it, is the science communication side of it. That's part of what I've been trying to edge towards, and how I guess I guess that adds on to the question of I guess the skipping ahead, what sort of additional material are you planning on including in this edition that like takes into account the prescience of it all? You said like it was prescient in terms of
Right,
like,
right.
yeah, these things happened ahead of time. It's been a decade. What, like, update on the world that you said you had a story that you wanted to
Yeah.
tell
I mean, I
beyond.
can't go into too many
Yeah,
specifics.
yeah.
We're going to do a stretch goal that's going to unlock new material from Martin and I. We want to tell a short story, and all I can really tell you about that is that it's going to feel both familiar, if you remember these characters and the world they inhabited, and I hope point us in a bit of a new direction if in fact we got to do more Great Pacific.
Yeah.
So that's
Do you have
really the crux of what we're doing.
plans for any like the concept art and stuff, that like collection of the work that went into building it,
Oh yeah,
or
we're gonna have a lot of behind the scenes stuff included in
cool?
this book.
Because I referred to it as an omnibus, but I wasn't sure if that was the proper term for this. Is
I,
that what
I
you would
say
call
the
like?
completely trashed edition, but it is an omnibus.
Yeah, okay. I think that's fair. So, and then I while I had you here, I had obviously an X-Files question to ask. I
Okay.
mentioned it was part of my childhood. Like, my grandma took me to see the movie. For the first movie came out after we
Like
watched the show together.
future. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a huge fan of the Darren Morgan episodes, and I was just
Mhm.
really curious, like, what your favorite parts of the X Files franchise were. Like, what pulled you into it and made you want to work on it in the first place?
Well, it's funny. One of the very early episodes that stuck with me was episode 2 of the second season, where Darren Morgan portrays Fluke Man.
Fluke
He's
Man.
Yeah, he's actually in the
Oh yeah, he's in the suit. He's where yeah.
We were actually talking. I was talking to him at File Fest, which was in Minneapolis, a 30th anniversary X Files show that was put together last year.
I've never been to a File Fest. I didn't know
Yeah,
that was a thing. That sounds like
No,
fun.
believe me, when you work on the X Files, you get invited to these things.
That sounds great.
So, I mean, I think those episodes are genius. a lot of what I had to concern myself with was, aside from bringing back Fluke Man, which was an ambition that we wanted to do, was really building off of the mythology stuff that Chris Carter and Frank Spotnitz had really ironed out.
Because it runs deep and the fans pay attention, I know.
It's I had to do a deep rewatch to get myself back up to speed of all the, we call it the myth arc, of all the myth arc episodes.
Right. Yep.
And it's a great, for like 5-6 seasons, the movie, like it is so compelling and so masterfully done. All those cliffhangers, season 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leading into the movie, like those are all so well done and so entertaining. So I like stuff like that. I love the season cliffhangers because they were always mythology based. I love the Syndicate and I love the Smoking Man, and any opportunity to get those shadowy people back on screen was something we look forward to.
Yeah, I think that the undercurrent throughout, it rang. It was interesting because thinking about that being a part of my fiction as a kid, and
Right.
how that impacted the way that you reflect on what you see happening in reality, and how it like gives you the impetus for critical thinking and exploring on your, just thinking how do you get to the bottom of things, the forensics of it, deducing.
Right.
And yeah, it was definitely a huge inspiration. So I always want to conclude with an opportunity for guests to highlight some of the work totally unrelated to their own projects that,
Okay.
You were mentioning stuff that you worked on, but what else is out there that you think our audience should check out that has been inspiring you, like across comics, movies, everything?
On Apple TV Plus, Slow Horses is about to come back, which is a fantastic British show starring Gary Oldman. So good. Great espionage spy stuff, but it's kind of sardonic, and it's very now, and he's wonderful in it. And
always.
And season 4, I think, comes out right after Labor Day. So I urge everyone to get caught up on that. It's between Gary Oldman and Kristen Scott Thomas, there's just a lot to love in this show. Also, what else? I just finished watching The Tourist, which was an Australian show. It's on Netflix now.
All right, cool. I need to get more Australian media in and properly acculturate. So,
and let's see what else. I mean, I've been listening to the reissued vinyl for the Grateful Dead's From the Mars Hotel, which is about love, as well as Pink Floyd's Animals, which was released a few months ago.
Nice.
Remixed and remastered. Really good stuff.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask. I did it in the background reading. I know that's this is back to some of your work, but the rock stars. I just saw, like, as I was going through your site. Did you conclude that? Is that right? That's like a completed edition as well?
Yeah, it was concluded. It ran for 10 issues total, so there were 2 story arcs.
Okay.
And it was collected in a complete edition by Vault Comics.
Okay, all right, that's what I thought. So it started with Image and then was put together.
Yeah, the only place you can get all 10 issues collected is through that Vault edition.
Okay, cool.
We never did a traded Image.
Fantastic. And yeah, that leads me to our conclusion, which is if there's any portfolio publication or social media stuff that you want our audience to know about, you've got my email, and we can include it in the notes or in the document, and it'll go into the
right on.
Thank you very much, Joe. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This should be up shortly.
Awesome.
So,
cool.
Have a good one. Enjoy your weekend.
Enlightening and fun interview. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.